which brings us to the statement on sentencing guidelines. Lord Chancellor.
Here. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I will make a statement on sentencing in England and Wales. As the House will be aware, new guidelines from the Sentencing Council over pre-sentence reports have come under scrutiny in recent weeks. Specifically, whether an offender's faith or the colour of their skin should be a factor in their use. This is a question of huge import, whether we all stand equal before the law. That is an ideal that has underpinned justice in this country for centuries, and an ancient right that each of us in this House has a responsibility to uphold. The new guidelines on the use of pre-sentence reports were due to come into force from today, but in recent weeks I have had constructive talks with the Sentencing Council. I am grateful to its chair, Lord Justice William Davis, for that engagement. As a result, I am pleased to tell the House that the guidelines have been put on pause while Parliament rightly has its say. I think it is important to first understand how we got into this position. Under the previous government, the Sentencing Council proposed changes to its imposition of community and custodial sentences guidelines. They are concerned with whether a judge should make a community or custodial order when sentencing an offender and the thresholds for these disposals. When the courts are deciding whether the community order threshold is met or the custody threshold is met, they are required by law to obtain a pre-sentencing report unless they consider it unnecessary to do so. These reports provide more information to the court, helping to provide a greater understanding of the background and context of the offending behaviour. They are a tool at the disposal of judges. The guidelines provide further guidance to courts on how to approach the decision of whether to request a pre-sentence report. In this instance, they help them determine what sentence might best be handed down. Now, in general, I should be clear, I welcome the use of pre-sentence reports. In the last few months, I have created capacity within the probation service to ensure that they have more time for vital work like this. But the new guidance, if it came into force, would encourage judges to request them for some cohorts of offenders and not others. Specifically, it notes that it would, and I quote, normally be considered necessary to request pre-sentence reports for ethnic, cultural or faith minorities. It is important to be clear about the impact a pre-sentence report is likely to have in this instance, which is that it is more likely to discourage a judge from sending an offender to jail, and it is this that creates the perception of differential treatment before the law and risks undermining public confidence in the justice system. A repeated theme of my engagement with the Sentencing Council over the guidelines has been the intention behind them. It was attempting to address very real inequalities that exist in our justice system, inequalities that are evident in the sentences offenders receive. It is unclear why this happens, something which the Sentencing Council acknowledges. There is no doubt that more must be done to understand the problem we face and to address it. There are some measures already taking place across our justice system to make it more representative of the public that it serves, such that it can deliver outcomes in which we can all have confidence. And I note that the proportion of ethnic minorities within the judiciary has risen from just 7% 10 years ago to 11% today. While change can feel slow and must accelerate, my view is that despite the noble intentions behind them, in attempting to address inequalities in our justice system, these guidelines sacrifice too much. They raise a serious question of policy. In the pursuit of equality of outcome for different religions and races, should we treat them differently before the eyes of the law and move so far away from an ideal that has underpinned justice in this country for centuries? On this, I am clear. All must be equal before the law. I know there will be disagreement in this House with regards to the correct policy to pursue. There have been, as I have noted, differences of opinion amongst the opposition benches. I expect the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, who opposes these guidelines, and the now Shadow Transport Secretary, who welcomed them while in office, have been having some robust conversations in recent days. I doubt, however, there is any disagreement that this is a question of policy. How the state addresses an issue that is systemic and complex is clearly the domain of policymakers. It is right that questions like these are discussed and debated here. It is right that the public can hold us to account for the decisions that we take and that they can ultimately reward or punish at the ballot box. The role of judges is entirely different. They are concerned not with how policy is made, but how it is applied. The independence of our judges to make those determinations is fundamental to our justice system. Over centuries, they have built a reputation for fairness, making them world-renowned and respected. They are the embodiment of the rule of law in our country. To play that role, they must be able to make decisions on the facts without any outside influence. They must know that they have the government behind them, protecting them as they do that vital work. When I swore my oath as Lord Chancellor, I made a solemn pledge to protect and defend the independence of the judiciary, and I always will. But in order to do so, it is essential that the boundaries between what is policy and what is judicial decision-making are clear. And for that reason, the Government will today introduce the Sentencing Guidelines Pre-Sentence Reports Bill. It is a tightly focused bill. It does not interfere with the vital work of the Council providing guidance to judges on how to sentence offenders. It addresses the issue of when a pre-sentence report should be ordered. The bill adopts a targeted approach. It does not prevent Council guidance from advising in general terms that pre-sentence reports should be requested when judges need more information about an offender's personal circumstances. It will remain the case, for example, that where an offender is a victim of domestic abuse, a judge can consider it in deciding whether to order a pre-sentence report. But it does prohibit the Council from making guidelines about pre-sentence reports with specific reference to the offender's personal characteristics, such as their race, religion or belief or cultural background. The bill will not affect the court's existing duties to obtain a pre-sentence report in appropriate cases, nor does it change court precedent around them, like the recent case of Thompson, in which the Court of Appeal noted the importance of obtaining a pre-sentence report in cases involving pregnant women or women who have recently given birth. Or the case of Meanley, where the court referred to the importance of pre-sentence reports in serious cases involving young defendants, or Kermakaj, where the court emphasised the defendant's traumatic upbringing, vulnerability and the fact that they had been a victim of modern slavery, as reasons why a pre-sentence report should be ordered. Judges will continue to request pre-sentence reports in cases where they ordinarily would, for example, those involving pregnant women and young people. I accept that this bill will, however, raise wider questions about the role of the Sentencing Council. The Council does important work, bringing greater consistency to judicial decision-making. But we are here today discussing a question of policy, a difficult, disputed and uncertain one at that. If the government cannot determine national policy on the question of equality of treatment before the law, then we have uncovered a democratic deficit. Today's legislation exposes that question, but it does not address it. The proper role of the Sentencing Council and the process for making guidelines of this type must be considered further. I will do so in the coming months. It is right that this question is considered in greater depth, and should further legislation be required, I shall propose it as part of the upcoming sentencing bill. The Sentencing Council, while only 15 years old, holds an important position within the firmament of our justice system, and any changes must be made carefully and with due consideration. I am sure they will be discussed more in this House in the months ahead. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government will today introduce the Sentencing Guidelines Pre-Sentence Reports Bill. The issue it contains are of great consequence because the path to a more equal society can only be paved by equality before the law. Again, I thank the Sentencing Council for putting a pause on their guidelines whilst Parliament has its say. I believe that we must reverse them and reassert that no race or religion should receive preferential treatment before the law, and the bill we will introduce today will achieve that. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, The Lord Chancellor must be living in a parallel universe if she's giving herself a pat on the back today. The truth is that she's completely lost control of the justice system. She sat on her hands for weeks. She took 7 days to gather her thoughts and put her views in writing to the Sentencing Council. Her incompetence took this down to the wire. Magistrates and judges were only updated by the press office of the Sentencing Council at midday today that the guidelines they were due to come into force had in effect been suspended. That raises the very real prospect that magistrates and judges sitting from 10 a.m. this morning were unaware of this chaotic last-minute change and did sentence people under guidelines that the Justice Secretary herself has conceded are two-tier. But it gets worse. In that very email to thousands of judges and magistrates sent just 90 minutes ago, the Sentencing Council state, and I quote, "We remain of the view that the guidelines are necessary and appropriate." Confusion reigns. They're being told one thing by the Lord Chancellor and another by the Sentencing Council. Who really is in charge here? Yet again, the Justice Secretary has been humiliated and undermined by activist judges seeking to undermine the will of this place, our Parliament. Her authority has been shredded. She is being treated as a two-tier, second-tier Justice Secretary. Madam Deputy Speaker, this was entirely preventable if the Justice Secretary had simply put party politics to one side and just backed our bill weeks ago to restore accountability and empower her to actually control justice policy. But the Labour Party blocked it. If the Prime Minister has been tricked into sitting at the front of the Docklands Light Railway thinking that he's in charge, as his Chief of Staff mocked him for the other day, the Lord Chancellor has chosen to sit there in the passenger seat, allowing the judiciary to take charge. She's decided to be undecided. She's resolved to be irresolute, all-powerful to be impotent. Even after this complete shambles, she won't even re-establish ministerial oversight. We're told via frantic press briefings that her bill, which we haven't even seen yet, will surgically remove this two-tier sentencing guidelines. But this doesn't tackle the root cause of the problem at all, which is a legal quango that is activist, which holds views completely divergent to the public, to Parliament, and now we're told to the government. Unless she follows the formula of our bill, MPs on this side produced will be back here time and again to unwind the next piece of madness coming out of the Council. Take the Sentencing Council's immigration guidelines that water down sentences for immigration offences below the 12-month threshold for automatic deportation. If published, it will mean hundreds of illegal migrants and foreign national offenders will avoid deportation every single year. It will blow a hole in border security. It even waters down the maximum life sentence of people smugglers legislated for just under a year ago. It completely disregards parliamentary sovereignty. At our last exchange, the Justice Secretary said there would be no two-tier justice on her watch. Well, there it is. And it is worse than that. On the 2nd of January, her own department, not the Sentencing Council, her own department published guidance ordering the prioritisation of bail for ethnic minorities and transgender people, continuing a practice introduced under Gordon Brown. And contrary to the misinformation peddled by her press office, it produced new guidance on pre-sentencing reports that have been enforced for months, which state probation officers should consider the culture of an offender and whether they have suffered, and I quote, intergenerational trauma from historical events. Well, this is cultural relativism, which violates the rule of law and puts the British public at risk. And this time, nobody is to blame other than her. It's her department, it's black and white, it is two-tier justice. So I have some questions. Can she give the House Can she give the House the reassurance that nobody was sentenced this morning under guidelines that she concedes are two-tier? After he has brought the Sentencing Council into total disrepute, can she honestly say at the dispatch box that she has confidence in the head of the Sentencing Council, Lord Justice Davis? Yes or no? And if she does, is she aware that yesterday he took to the airways in an astonishing departure from the expected standards of judicial conduct to advocate for abolishing short sentences, especially for hyper-prolific offenders, effectively instructing lower courts to follow suit? It's time for him to go, and if she won't sack him for this, what would it take? Does she have confidence in Joanna Robinson, another member of the Sentencing Council, who took a moral objection to border control and described the Illegal Immigration Act as appalling? And lastly, will she change the guidance which her own department is producing, which has created a two-tier probation service? Or is it, once again, on her watch, two-tier justice under two-tier care?
Lord Chancellor.
Dear me, Madam Deputy Speaker, it seems that the honourable gentleman's case of amnesia is as bad as ever. 14 whole years appear to have disappeared from his memory entirely. He talks about parliamentary sovereignty, he appears never to have known when his own party was in government, when he was a Secretary of State and a Minister, what on earth parliamentary sovereignty is and how to exercise power. I think he's rather distressed that, in fact, my approach has led to a pause in these guidelines, and that I have brought forward a bill that will deal with the offending bit of this guideline, and that I'm going to consider the wider role and powers of the Sentencing Council ahead of the sentencing bill later this year. I understand it must be very disappointing for him that he has been exposed as someone who is all talk, no action, and I get the job done, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can see that it's annoying him greatly. Perhaps he would like to begin, as I often invite him to do so when we have our exchanges across this dispatch box, to apologise for the country, because after 14 years he appears to have never discovered anything of which he now discusses regularly from his position on the opposition benches. He did nothing about those matters when he was a member of the government that actually ran this country. Perhaps that's the problem. They didn't really run this country. They gave up on the job. He never rolled up his sleeves and put in the hard work to get the job done. That's why we inherited prisons on the brink of collapse, and that's why I'm now unwinding all of the mistakes that his party made and the guidance that they welcomed. The guidance that he and his party welcomed. He didn't tell me what discussions he's had with the Shadow Transport Secretary, and before they explain why they're so het up about things now, why did they welcome them when they were in office? There was no answer to those questions. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't believe there were very many questions in that diatribe from the Shadow Justice Secretary. On sentencing, the pause in the guideline was communicated. That's a matter for the Sentencing Council. I will, of course, engage with the judiciary to make sure all is understood regarding the pause. Nothing has changed in relation to the ordering of pre-sentencing reports by judges in all the circumstances in which they ordinarily would. The guideline is what has been paused, and it will now not come into effect until Parliament has had its say. And also, Madam Deputy Speaker, he references two specific individuals, and this is the difference between me and him. I don't make it personal. I just focus on the job, and I get the job done.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
I realise this is not a popular view in the House, but the Justice Secretary will be aware that some of us are astonished that she thinks our judges are so weak-minded as to be affected by what are guidelines in relation to how they sentence black and brown defendants. The Justice Secretary will also be aware that report after report, repeated statistical analysis has demonstrated what some of us consider to the unfairness in relation to black and brown people and the criminal justice system. But the Justice Secretary will also be aware that there is a reason why the Sentencing Council is independent. It was made a statutory independent body to avoid even the appearance of ministerial interfering in sentencing. This is not the United States. Our political system and our judicial system are entirely separate. And can the Justice Secretary explain why she is so triumphant at not just interfering in sentencing, but actually passing a piece of legislation to cut across what the Sentencing Council is saying?
Lord Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for her questions. At least she asked some proper questions. She says that her view might be an unpopular view on the policy, but this is the place where views on policy, popular or unpopular, can and should be debated. And that is at the heart of my disagreement with the Sentencing Council on this guideline, because I think these matters, which she raises in relation to race and the disparities that we see in the criminal justice system, are the proper preserve of politicians. The answer to how we deal with those issues will be a policy answer. It is for a government and an opposition and other members to have a debate about that policy answer and for it to be pursued through Parliament. And that is why I reject entirely the suggestion that anything I have done impinges upon the independence of the judiciary or calls into question the separation of powers in this country. The Sentencing Council is itself a creature of statute. It is only 15 years old, and I think that a politician, a government minister, the Lord Chancellor, asserting that there is a boundary between that which is policy and a matter for Parliament and that which is judicial practice and consistency of judicial practice in individual cases, I think that is entirely proper. I have sought to reassert that boundary. I look forward to working with members across this House of differing views as we consider the wider role and powers of the Sentencing Council, because I have said that I will return to those matters in the coming months.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Josh Babarinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's only one group who have lost control of our justice system in this House, and it's the decimated former government on the benches over there. Overcrowded prisons, re-offending through the roof, victims waiting for justice. What a disgrace. And that disgrace continues today by the downplaying of the... That disgrace continues today by the downplaying of the impact of intergenerational trauma, of which child abuse is a form that we've just heard from the Shadow Justice Secretary. Now, I thank the Lord Chancellor for engaging with me on this issue in advance of this statement. And our criminal justice system's ability to take someone's freedom away is one of the most humbling powers that it holds, which is why sentencing decisions must include all of the information available. Pre-sentence reports are a critical part of that process. And she's mentioned pregnant women, survivors of domestic abuse, survivors of modern slavery as important examples of where that's considered. But because everybody has a context, Liberal Democrats believe that these reports should be made available consistently wherever anyone's liberty is at stake. And so we'll therefore be scrutinising this legislation through this lens of equality before the law. But it is rich of the Conservatives to complain about inequality in our justice system when it was them who presided over a state of affairs where someone from one of our country's most deprived areas is 10 times more likely to be in prison than the least deprived, where someone who looks like me is 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched than others, when someone with special educational needs represents half of the prison population compared to a fifth of the general population. So will the Justice Secretary outline how she'll fairly tackle these disparities to restore confidence in the justice system so shattered by the Conservative Party sat over there?
Lord Chancellor.
thank the Liberal Democrat spokesman for his questions. Look, he is right, and I said this in my own statement. Pre-sentence reports are an incredibly vital tool for judges before passing sentence, and in fact the requirement is that they should ask for a pre-sentence report unless the court considers it unnecessary to do so. So there is a strong push towards obtaining pre-sentence reports in what would be, the vast majority of cases. I know that the probation service that I inherited from the previous administration has struggled under increased workloads. It was a service that the Conservative Party privatised and then part renationalised. I mean, they have been through the mill, have our probation service officers who do vital work every single day. I've been making changes to the focus of the probation service in the last few months in order to pivot their work so that they focus on high and medium risk offenders and that we can spare up probation capacity so that more time can be spent doing vital work like the preparation of pre-sentence reports. I will carry on working with the probation service to make sure it's ready to do what is asked of it and to do so to a very high and consistent standard, which I know will be important to all members across this House. I've already announced 1,300 extra probation officers this financial year, which has just passed, and another 1,000 in this coming financial year as well. So probation remains vital to the preparation of pre-sentence reports, and we will make sure that it's in a position to meet the asks that are made of it. The wider points about disparities across the criminal justice system, I thank him for the spirit in which he has engaged with me on these matters already. I have the same concerns that he has. But what I believe is that we should understand what the latest data is showing us. That's why I've asked for a review of all of the current data, and we should test whether any solutions we come up with, there are policy solutions, so they would have to be debated and passed in this House, and politicians are ultimately responsible at the ballot box for the choices they make. But those solutions have to work. They have to yield a change in those disparities, and that is what I want to test. And one of the things that has been very clear in the engagement that I've had with the Sentencing Council on this particular guideline is that they have accepted that the causes of the disparities are unclear and no one is sure whether the changes to pre-sentence reports would make a difference anyway. And I'm not willing to sacrifice public confidence in the criminal justice system or chip away at the idea of equality before the law for solutions that are the appropriate debate in this place, but also we're not even sure would work. But I look forward to working with him closely in the coming weeks and months on these issues.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Sentencing Council is a judicial body whose president is the Lady Chief Justice and whose chair is a distinguished Court of Appeal judge. Its function was previously executed by the Court of Appeal. It is fully independent, but is linked to Parliament, not least because the Justice Committee is a statutory consultee for all its guidelines, including those under discussion today. Its judicial leadership, independence and democratic accountability are its strengths and a primary reason it is held in high esteem in the criminal justice system. Will the Lord Chancellor reassure me that those attributes will remain integral to the Council, whatever changes are proposed in the current legislation, sentencing review and sentencing bill?
Lord Chancellor.
Well, I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for his question. Of course, I respect the independence of the judiciary. I think I was very clear in my statement and the remarks I've already made on the fact that I not only stand behind that principle, but I have taken an oath which I fulfil and consider my duty to do so. What I consider us to be in disagreement on with the Sentencing Council is that this is properly an area of policy rather than a mere tool for the consistency of judicial practice when it comes to sentencing. That is the point of principle in which we have a disagreement, and it is why I will be considering a further review of the wider role and powers of the Sentencing Council. I will simply repeat to my honourable friend that making sure that a creature of statute is operating in a way that was intended when that statute came into place is the proper preserve of politicians and Parliament, and I hope that that is an issue on which we can all agree across this House.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Lord Chancellor for her rather belated statement? I particularly welcome her observation that, should we say, recent events have uncovered a democratic deficit. Is she not concerned that it was my right honourable friend, the Shadow Justice Secretary, who uncovered this deficit, and not herself or her ministerial team or her department? It was my right honourable friend who first raised the issue of two-tier sentencing guidelines in this chamber on the 5th of March, 4 weeks ago. So could the Lord Chancellor advise why she's waited until the eve of their introduction to bring forward her emergency legislation?
Chancellor.
I mean, if he's concerned about the guideline and what was brought to whose attention when, perhaps people in his party shouldn't have waved them through before the general election and welcomed them as the Shadow Transport Secretary did. I notice how none of them are engaging on the substance of that particular point. I'm the one that's dealing with the democratic deficit. They had 14 years in power, did nothing about it, and now they're just carped from the sidelines.
Babarinde just.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Lord Chancellor agree that the previous government was consulted on and indeed welcomed the Sentencing Council's new guidelines, and therefore it is totally unfair of the members opposite to have accused this government of a two-tier system? And does she agree that it is yet again another example of this government having to clear up the previous government's mess?
Chancellor. My honourable friend is right. There are many members opposite who appear to have a very loose relationship with their own track record.
Yeah. Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Lord Chancellor is right that equality before the law lies at the heart of popular respect for justice. But I have to say to her that it's not this House that endangers the separation of powers, but judicial activists, as my right honourable friend has made palpably clear, who are more interested in making laws than applying them. So will she, as my right honourable requested, let this House know whether she retains faith in the Sentencing Council, on its members, or whether, like me, she believes that having been exposed, they should now do the honest and right thing and resign.
Chancellor.
Well, look, I've already said I'm not interested in making a personal attack on anybody. I have a point of principle disagreement with members of the Sentencing Council about what is the proper preserve of policy and what is the proper role that they should play. We have tried to resolve it. They've agreed to pause their guideline. We will move forward constructively. I will not stand back and let people attack the independence of the judiciary. I have sworn a solemn oath. I will fulfil that oath, and we are very lucky in this country to have the sort of legal system that we do, a judiciary that is held in high regard. These are public servants of the highest order. It is very easy for politicians. It is easy for politicians to throw attacks, I feel, on matters of policy or politics they don't like. But as I have just shown, if politicians or parliamentarians disagree, we have the power to change it.
Ben Goldsborough.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The juridification of law is always something that should worry us all, and we should make sure the primacy remains within this House, and the steps taken today are an important step there. But the thing that's worrying is for 14 years no action was taken by the party opposite. So does my honourable friend believe it was because of incompetence or just for a lack of understanding of what that meant for the country?
Lord Chancellor.
I mean, who can say, really? I say to my honourable friend, I'd suggest asking any of the members opposite if they've got an answer for that, but they appear to still wish to live on another planet and never reckon with their own track record in government.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
Black people in Wales were the most overrepresented ethnic group in prison in 2023, followed by those from a mixed background and people belonging to an Asian ethnic group. This overrepresentation is worse in Wales than England. Pre-sentencing reports can help understand why people of black and minority ethnic backgrounds are more likely to be sent to prison. Even if she disagrees with the method, surely the Secretary of State agrees that action is necessary to tackle evidenced inequality within the criminal justice system. So what solutions is she bringing forward?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Let me just say the proper role of a pre-sentence report is to give a judge who's about to pass down a sentence vital information about the context of that offender, for example, whether there's been domestic abuse, their age, other vital factors to the offending behaviour, so they can make a decision on the best sentence to pass. It isn't about setting right any other wrongs that, whilst legitimate, also exist. That is not the point of the pre-sentence report. It is about giving the sentencer in every single individual case the information they need, such as whether a woman is pregnant, such as whether she's just recently given birth to a child, as the Court of Appeal has upheld recently. Those are those circumstances should be properly understood by judges. And as I say, the position in law is a pre-sentence report should be sought by judges in all cases unless the court considers it unnecessary to do so. I think that covers the majority of cases where a pre-sentence report should be sought, and we should not confuse the proper role of what the pre-sentence report is there to do. To the extent that there are over-representations, and I see those too, I'm somebody who has a constituency that is over 70% non-white. As she can see, I'm from an ethnic minority background myself. I'm also a faith minority. I see those disparities. They are a lived reality of my own life too. What I'm not prepared to do is sacrifice the principle of equality before the law in order to put these disparities right. I wish to be more curious than anybody else has been in previous years as to what lies really behind those disparities and what are the proper tools that have to be levers that have to be pulled in order to put these right, because we've often discussed judicial diversity, but I'm not sure that increases in diversity have necessarily led to a change in what the underlying data is showing us. So clearly there is more going on, and to the extent that politicians need to come up with those solutions, they have to be tested in this House because they are properly the domain of policy and Parliament.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on a victory over the Sentencing Council on a fundamental principle of equality before the law. The independence of the Sentencing Council does not entitle them to go over their boundaries into the area of policy and politics into which they have strayed. I think this is such a fundamental issue that those members of the Sentencing Council, having made those fundamental errors of judgment, should no longer be able to carry on in the job, whether it is by their own decision or by the Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend. In fairness to the Sentencing Council, they sought views from the previous government and were told that the government welcomed both in the consultation and the guideline. They didn't do anything wrong in terms of the process that they followed. I, of course, did invite them to consider the fact that there has been a change of government since they began work on this guideline and a change of policy, and that they should reopen the consultation. I was disappointed that they chose not to do so, but as I say, I'm not interested in making this a personal debate about individuals. I am grateful to the Council for pausing the guideline. It has not come into effect. All of our previous arrangements in relation to pre-sentencing reports remain in place, and as I say, I am considering the wider role and powers of the Sentencing Council, and I will return to this House with further proposals in due course.
Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, the cherished idea of equal treatment before the law is absolutely fundamental to my constituents' understanding of British justice. So why didn't the Justice Secretary act immediately to stop the imposition of two-tier sentencing rather than the last-minute scramble we saw yesterday? And she says in the statement today the proportion of ethnic minorities within the judiciary has risen from just 7% 10 years ago to 11% today. To what extent does she consider that that's simply reflective of wider demographic change rather than discrimination in the judiciary?
Just on the diversity in the judiciary point, I mean, that is something on which there has been consensus in this House, and there's been a lot of effort to try and encourage applications for people to consider leaving private practice behind and becoming judges, and I think that has started to have an effect. I think that having institutions that are more representative of the country that they represent is an important principle. I hope there is cross-party consensus in this House that it's important for Parliament to look at least a little bit like the people that it also seeks to represent. Whether increase in diversity of judges is necessarily going to be the fix to disparity issues that we see in the criminal justice system, I'm not sure of that. That's why I've asked for a review of what the current data is telling us and to tease out whether there is a relationship between those two things. If there isn't, then we need to think more carefully about the other policy levers that might be needed. And as I say, I think those are properly matters for this House to discuss. On her broader point about the Sentencing Council, I actually used a power to ask the Sentencing Council to think again, which has never been used before in all of the 15 years of existence of the Sentencing Council. I've done everything, I believe, the proper way. I asked them to think again. I engaged with the Sentencing Council. They told me at the end of last week that they were going to stick with it and publish the guideline, and it would come into force today on the 1st of April, and that's why I said I would legislate. I brought forward a bill. It has been published today, and thankfully the Sentencing Council has chosen to pause the guideline until Parliament has had its say. I have done everything exactly as I should have done, instead of rushing to rhetoric, which I don't believe solves anything.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Pregnant women and new mothers are at high risk in custody. They're 7 times more likely to experience a stillbirth, and at least 2 baby deaths have taken place in recent years. Among other important measures, the Sentencing Council has issued guidance on the use of prison sentences for pregnant women and new mothers. That was, of course, supposed to come into effect today, and any delay to that risks causing untold preventable harm. I'm relieved that the Lord Chancellor has committed to protect this guidance, but how quickly will it be implemented? Because women can't wait any longer.
Chancellor.
I can offer my honourable friend immediate reassurance. Nothing in the bill that we have published today, which is a very targeted bill on the ability of the Sentencing Council to bring forward guidelines relating only to pre-sentence reports and personal characteristics. So it's a very tightly focused bill. Nothing in that bill affects any Court of Appeal precedent, and there is already a strong Court of Appeal precedent on the desirability of a court obtaining pre-sentence reports before it passes sentence in cases involving pregnant women and women who have recently given birth. More widely on the issues of policy relating to women in the criminal justice system, I hope she will welcome the fact that I've set up the Women's Justice Board specifically to look at the needs of female offenders across the whole of the criminal justice system. I am determined, it is a position of policy for this government, that we send fewer women to prison and ultimately have fewer women's prisons. That is properly a matter for policy. It will be contested in this House, I am sure, but that is the realm of politics, Parliament and ultimately the ballot box.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the news today that the Sentencing Council at the last minute had a change of heart on pre-sentencing. But I want to go back to the question raised by my honourable friend, the member for Bridgewater, which is why did it take the efforts of the Shadow Justice Secretary to get the Lord Chancellor to have a change of heart on this really important matter? Because we didn't get an answer before. Thank you.
I did answer it, it didn't.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in Rochdale, whatever their ethnic background, are united in supporting the principle, the ancient British principle of equality under the law. So can I welcome what the Justice Secretary has produced today, which is in stark contrast to the opposition, who welcomed their previous attempt at two-tier justice. And does she agree with me that pre-sentence reports should be available for all offenders and never be linked to ethnicity, culture or faith?
My honourable friend is right. I wish to see the widest possible use of pre-sentencing reports, and that it is my job to ensure that the probation service is in a position to be able to provide pre-sentencing reports whenever they are required by the court, and that courts have confidence in the reports that they are getting, and I will ensure that that is the case.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Has the Lady Chief Justice been rebuked for the impertinence of her letter to the Prime Minister following Prime Minister's questions on the 12th of February, when he perfectly properly questioned another absurd judicial decision?
No, I have very positive conversations with the Lady Chief Justice. She has an important constitutional function and obligations, as do I. Our conversations are collaborative and constructive. On that matter, the government made its view clear that the exchange at Prime Minister's questions ultimately turned on a question of policy, which is the proper realm of politicians and ultimately Parliament.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for her decisive action on this issue and note that this government isn't ducking from political decisions rather than farming them out to quangos like the last lot did with bodies like NHS England, or blaming the blob for crashing the economy when it was Liz Truss's mini-budget. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that politics and policy are the domain of this House and its ministers, and can she reassure me that this government will continue to make sure that we in this House can make the decisions that the public expect us to be making?
My honourable friend is right. The business of government is difficult. It requires lots of effort. I think the contrast between this government and the approach we are taking and that had been taken by the Tory party over their 14 years, I think that contrast is stark. We're getting on with the job.
Colin Lockhart.
Deputy Speaker, while the Sentencing Council guidelines do not apply in Northern Ireland, does the Lord Chancellor accept that controversial changes in England, such as reduced likelihood of custodial sentences for certain groups, risks undermining confidence in the justice system across the entire UK? And can she outline what steps she is taking to ensure fairness and consistency in sentencing across all jurisdictions, regardless of ethnicity, culture or faith?
Well, look, there are, in England, in Wales, these are reserved matters, and these are guidelines that would only impact England and Wales. There are devolved arrangements here as well, which I am not proposing to upend in any way, but I'm always happy to have constructive conversations with colleagues in Scotland and Northern Ireland and in Wales as well on any of these matters, because we are obviously, in the end, UK system, even where some matters are devolved, and that collaboration is something that I really appreciate and value.
Jonathan Hinder.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I join colleagues in paying tribute to the Lord Chancellor for her decisive leadership and the thoughtful way in which she's answered the questions today? I welcome her confirmation that equality before the law will remain, as will my constituents in Pendle and Clitheroe, and I look forward to seeing the bill that she's proposing. And I can see the Tories are railing against the justice system that they left us. And I say to them, we on this side really are mad about it. A 70,000 Crown Court case backlog, no prison places left, and neighbourhood policing hollowed out. I say to the Lord Chancellor, is it any wonder that the voters so comprehensively rejected them?
And I think the country had its say on 14 years of the Tories in charge. And to be honest, given their legacy in the criminal justice system, I mean, it's not the approach I would take, but I'm not surprised that they're laughing, because the only other thing they could do is cry.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Why is the Lord Chancellor only proposing to take a very narrow power in respect of this two-tier pre-sentencing reports, rather than a general power, given other guidelines and draft guidelines, including for immigration offences, are far below the levels passed by this Parliament? The Sentencing Council is ignoring policy determined by this House. What more evidence does she need to act, and to act now?
Just on that immigration guideline, if I could just correct something the Shadow Justice Secretary said earlier, nothing in that guideline prevents the deportation of any foreign national offenders, and it is this government that has been getting on with the job, having deported over 24,000 foreign nationals, and our record on foreign national offenders is of 20% increase in removals this year compared to the same period last year. And look, I wanted to make sure that this guideline did not come into effect, and that is why I've published the targeted bill that I have. I've acknowledged that there is a debate to be had about the wider role and powers of the Sentencing Council. That is something I will return to in the weeks and months ahead.
Jake Richards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Sentencing Council was created in April 2010, and a month later the Conservatives came to power. If, as so many on the benches opposite seem to think, the Sentencing Council is a shadowy, revolutionary group of activist judges dangerously undermining the British way of life, why on earth did they not do anything about it? And does she agree? I think they agree with it now. Interesting. And does she agree with me that this episode is our constitution working? Parliament is sovereign, and if Parliament seeks to change this guidance, then under this government it will.
My honourable friend is exactly right. At no point has anybody on the opposite benches shown any humility or indeed tried to answer the question of why they didn't do anything about it. And as I say, the case of amnesia that the Shadow Justice Secretary is suffering from seems to be as bad as ever.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I certainly welcome that the Sentencing Council has been forced to back down on its woke proposal. But going forward with the new legislation, can the Lord Chancellor assure the House that there will be no dilution of the robust principles of the separation of power and of the independence of our judiciary, and that the right approach will continue to be that Parliament sets the maximum sentence for any criminal offence, and our judges, on a case-by-case basis, decide what that sentence should be?
He is absolutely right. It is for Parliament to set the overall sentencing framework, but every single judge has to see the case in front of them and make their own decisions. And as made very clear in my statement, I will always defend the independence of our judiciary. They do vital work. It is a crucial part of the separation of powers, and everything that I've sought to do, given this recent episode, has been to respect that separation of powers, but also to assert what we properly consider to be the realm of policy and for politicians and Parliament, and what is the realm of the judges.
Finally, Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Lord Chancellor for her statement. Does she agree with me the ideal of equality before the law is one we should all hold really closely, and that the biggest cause of two-tier justice was the mess the party opposite made to our probation service?
I'm grateful to my friend because he gives me an opportunity at the conclusion of this statement to support the probation service, which of all of the terrible legacy of the Tory party in the criminal justice system, including prisons on the point of collapse, what they did to the probation service was unconscionable. It is this government that is putting things right. I've already made changes to the probation service, and I will make sure that that is a service that is on the strongest possible footing going into the future as well.
I would like to thank the Lord Chancellor for her statement this afternoon, and will allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over.
Thank you.